Hi, I'm Tessa Zitter, producer of Identity Crisis. In recent episodes, we've been looking toward the future, asking questions about the trajectory of the Jewish people and elevating the voices of the leaders of our Jewish future. This week, we are returning to the episode on the troubles facing American Judaism today that we recorded in March at the Jewish Funders Network conference in Nashville. Yehuda and guests Sarah Hurwitz and Franklin Foer navigate what ails American Judaism, why we fear change, and what we want to strengthen and preserve for the future. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Identity Crisis, a show from the Shalom Hartman Institute creating better conversations about the major issues facing Jewish life. I'm Yehuda Kurtzer. We're recording today live in Nashville, Tennessee at a great venue, the Cannery, hosted at the Jewish Funders Network Conference. I'm really grateful to our sponsors, the Schusterman Family Philanthropies, the Crown Family Philanthropies, and the Jim Joseph Foundation for making this all possible. Really grateful for my guests for being here. I'll introduce them shortly. And I want to invite all of you in person, but also on the podcast as well, to stay tuned afterwards for a performance and some music from distant cousins. Pretty excited to share billing with them in this event tonight. It's a really anxious time. It's hard to tell sometimes what are the things we're genuinely supposed to be scared of and where are the times when we might be paranoid. I have a predisposition personally about the fixation that our Jewish community has with crisis. It's the kind of joke that's in the name of the podcast. The two main preoccupations in Jewish life are talking about identity and being anxious about crisis. In fact, that slash in the logo does a lot of work to illustrate those two concerns. American Jewish philosopher Shimon Ravidovich, writing in the middle of the 20th century, characterized us as a people as the ever-dying people. He wasn't describing Jewish life as much as mocking our instinct as a Jewish community to be convinced that we are the last generation of Jews. We are going to be the last people to turn off the lights. And I've always been sympathetic to that kind of critique. Is it really as bad as everybody says? Are we really on the verge of death, disappearance? Or is that simply a hobby, a habit that we've carried with Jews for a long time, even if it's actually hard-earned? We're about 2.5 or so weeks out of Passover. And in the Passover liturgy, and this is something that Frank cited in his article, in the Passover liturgy, we say, in every generation, they rise up to destroy us and God saves us. And maybe that's true. I don't know whether it's we save ourselves or God saves us, or maybe we're not fully threatened to the extent that we feel. But the threats do feel there, and our anxieties, especially today, feel pretty hard-earned. As I said, no one wants to be the last one here, and none of us want to be Jewish leaders who make decisions in a moment like this that make us feel as though we didn't do enough to stand up against the existential challenges, whether they come from the outside or whether they come from the inside. A former colleague of mine at Hartman, Shaul Magid, wrote about a decade ago about intermarriage and about the transformations of Jewish identity in America, which our community spent decades talking about as an existential fear. It's worth naming that because, in retrospect, it was not actually an existential fear for American Jews. But one of the things he said is, in 100 years, American Jews will still be here. It's just that our Jewish community is going to look very different than it does today. And sometimes it's hard to know whether that's consolation, because when we talk about what we're scared of, it's not merely a question of will the Jewish people disappear, it's will we be unrecognizable. Fears of continuity are not just about disappearance, it's about the transformation of our community with something that might be better, but in the end might actually be worse. I've been thinking a lot about metaphors that people sometimes use to describe the condition that we face as Jews, and oftentimes, weirdly, a number of Jewish thinkers go to the terminology of illness. Around the turn of the 20th century, this was pretty common. A Zionist thinker named Max Nordau, who actually was also a physician, so it may not have been so crazy for him to deploy this metaphor, felt that the condition of the Jews was a kind of sickness, an illness, a weakness, a degeneracy in the Jewish condition, and his prescription was that Jews had to become muscular. Literally and figuratively, it was a big anchoring idea of his Zionism. But it wasn't just the Zionists who felt there was something ill about the Jewish condition. And I'm not talking about like illness like the disease that anti-Semites say that Jews carry. This is an internal conversation. It wasn't just the Zionists. Franz Rosenzweig, a German Jewish thinker who wanted Jews to be more serious about learning and Jewish identity, the founder of the original Lehrhaus, Rosenzweig wanted Jews to invest in their Jewishness, and he too felt there was something sick about the Jewish condition. What he said, amazingly, was Zionism was a diagnostician of pure genius, but a most mediocre healer. It recognized something ill in the Jewish condition, but didn't like the prescription that it offered. I don't know about these metaphors of death, disease, debilitation, or illness. I find them fascinating and a little disturbing, and at the same time, it's noticeable to me how many thinkers, how many Jewish communal leaders are returning to that almost crippling anxiety, which, remember, is also a medical condition. That crippling anxiety and fear about what we face, the existential threats that we see against our bodies as Jews, but also the moral threats that many of us experience as corroding our souls. I thought about this when I read Frank's influential essay back in The Atlantic in April 2024 called "The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending," and especially a line that you wrote near the end, quote, "The case for pessimism is more convincing." Well, we could talk about that because pessimism is never falsifiable. Things can, in fact, always get worse. And I thought about that question of disease and illness and debilitation, even though you don't use it at all, Sarah, in your influential book, Here All Along from 2019, which was a memoir of self-discovery and searching for a version of a Jewishness that you hadn't found, and which almost characterized American Jewry as not sick, but hopelessly banal. Something deeply wrong that didn't allow you to thrive as a Jew. Both of you, I think, share some really deep, almost existential fears about the state and the future of American Jewry. And yet the difference between your writings is that, Frank, your recent piece characterized the foregoing era of American Jewry as one of thriving, a golden age, and Sarah, your longer arc story tells the story of a gradual weakening, and that's something I want to poke at tonight. I'm thrilled to be on stage with both of you. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for doing this in this amazing venue. And I want to start by asking where we are in the American Jewish story, what ways are we sick, and how we're going to get healthy again. And Sarah, I really want to start with you. You had a diagnosis of the condition of American Jewry in 2019 when you wrote your book. I think that diagnosis has changed a little bit. The things that trouble you about the state and future of American Jewry are a little bit different than you saw then. Walk us through a little bit. What was wrong then, and what do you think is going wrong now?
So, my diagnosis comes very much from my personal experience, which it turns out after publishing a book, I realized is the personal experience of probably the majority of American Jews, which is that I grew up with a kind of Judaism that was 3 holidays. There was Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Passover. They were the bad holidays. And then there was Hanukkah, which was the good holiday because there was a party. And that was the Judaism. The Christians in my town had a church. We had a temple. They had holidays, we had holidays. They worshiped God in their church, we worshiped God in our Jew church, and Judaism was sort of Christianity without the Jesus and with some fun ethnic stuff. And then when I actually grew up and, in my mid-30s was introduced to Jewish texts and substance, I was so stunned. I thought wait, I didn't see any of this in those 4 holidays. That just wasn't, and by the way, it wasn't just the fact that I stopped learning when I was 12 or 13, the adults in my community also were not familiar with any of these texts. The average American Jew has never heard of the Talmud. I know I say this to rabbis all the time and they don't believe me. I promise you. In fact, I'm going to go a little further. The average American Jew doesn't really know what the Torah is. It's a thing on the scrolls. It's in Hebrew. It's old. That's what I knew about the Torah 10 years ago. And I started studying and learning, and I wrote this really substantive book with 550 endnotes because I wanted to show people the substance I found. I didn't know Judaism had wisdom on death, birth, being a good spouse, parent, friend, conducting your business. I had no idea, and I wanted to share this. And then over the last 5 years, I've been thinking, why didn't I know? Well, why was this Judaism I grew up with so oddly edited? not only was the wisdom, anything post-Bible was just kind of disappeared, that was gone. And a lot of the really primal earth-based and nature-based traditions weren't there either. It was very strange. Like, the idea of kriya, of tearing your shirt, in a moment when you learn that someone you loved has died, or at their funeral, that's a really primal, powerful ritual. Tahara, what we do with the body, this ritual bathing, like these were not part of my community growing up, trust me. And I want to say, my second book, which I've been thinking about, it's like, why did that happen? And there's some history that I think we need to reckon with. I think 200 years ago, onset of modernity, Jews are becoming citizens. We need to figure out how to be citizens in the modern world. And we did our very best. We reformed Judaism. And thank God we did, because it allowed us to enter modernity. I'm a Jew today because of what those reformers did 200 years ago. But in some ways, and please don't yell at me when I say this, I've gotten some real pushback on this, but in some ways, we did kind of take a Protestant cookie cutter and jam it into Judaism and get rid of a lot of things that didn't fit. And I know why we did that. And we did it because we were just bathed in hatred and bathed in Christianity. And we were doing the best we could, but it came at a cost. We lost a lot. And Orthodoxy was a reaction to that. And there was a rigidity to that and a reactiveness to that. And that came at a cost. So, these denominations that have served us beautifully for so long, they came at a great cost. And I think now we have the ability to go back and reclaim what we lost. And so many Jews are doing that today.
Yeah, they're not going to yell at you because we told them to be quiet for a podcast recording. So they might be seething, but they're not going to yell at you. We'll come back to some of the pieces that you said. You said a lot there about the history of what we've inherited in this moment. Frank, I want to turn to you because your diagnosis of what's gone wrong is a little bit different. You tell a story of a golden age, actually, of American Judaism. And I guess I want to start with, what was the moment at which you felt that something was off in this story that you feel that we've inherited that's been, by and large, a positive story?
I think that there was a moment where I started to, obviously after Squirrel Hill and after Charlottesville, there was this moment where it felt like anti-Semitism had been this thing that was totally alien to late 20th century Jewish American existence. I think one of the thrills of living through the late 20th century as a Jew was just this sense that we weren't living in a world of alienation. We were totally at home in American culture and in American politics, where it was in fact a culture and a political culture to some extent that had actually been shaped by Jewish dreams and, to a lesser extent, Jewish anxieties about the potential for this nation. It was actually, there was a moment I was talking to my brother Josh, who's a friend of yours, and in, I think, 2018, and I said, I see these events and they're terrible, but I don't experience anti-Semitism in my own life. And my brother is, he's slightly more observant than I am. And he told me a couple stories. In Boston, there had been a couple things that had happened. He'd walk down the street one day after shul, and some guy came up behind him muttering, "Trump, Trump, Trump, Trump," in a very menacing sort of way. His in-laws, Stiebel in Westchester, had been shot up with a BB gun. His son's best friend is the son of a Chabad rabbi, and his house had been burnt down in arson. And I thought, I'm not connecting with this story, but there was something out here that I needed to understand. And then October 7th happened, and there was this explosion. I had kind of identified before October 7th much more strongly with the idea that there was a threat coming from the political right and from the far right against Jews, which I think is still a very salient feature of American politics. And then there was this other threat that was emerging, which I had kind of bracketed a little bit and maybe wished away. And so I guess, the scales fell from my eyes and that cliche after October 7th. But there was something that you said at the very beginning, that you were talking about anxiety and fear as Jewish emotions, and I guess also their political emotions that are very common. And it's hard not to experience them. There's so much about the way in which we've been conditioned as Jews in order to filter what we see through our canonical texts, through the experiences of our grandparents. And that's real. And I think that we can't shunt that to the side. But on the other hand, we also know that fear and anxiety are overwhelming emotions, and they occlude our ability to think strategically. And so in the Jewish brain, in order to navigate the world in which we live, we need to both be able to process that anxiety and that fear and not shunt it aside. Like, that is real, that is genuine, that's authentic. It's based in reality. But in order to navigate this world, I think we also need to be able to think strategically. We need to think about making political choices. And those choices can't be done from a position of abject fear, because if they are made from that position, then I think we'll make bad decisions.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to that, because there's a logical reason to say fear is a useful survival mechanism. It gives you preparedness to be able to handle existential threats. You've seen it before. You might have a playbook, but whether actually in real time it helps you do that, I'm not totally sure, or kind of gets in the way. I think what I see both of you share in common is a characterization of a lot of Jewish life in the 20th century as kind of what I'll call a warm bath of liberalism, for better or worse, right? The warm bath of liberalism creates the kind of conditions of assimilation that you see as having weakened our resolve to maintain our own particularism, to actually mine the stuff out of Jewish tradition that Jews perceived that they didn't really need. Like, why do I need particularly Jewish mourning rituals if what I'm borrowing from my neighbors is perfectly fine? But you've also described as like the warm bath of liberalism made Jews basically feel safe. And I share in common with you that, like, when I was in graduate school, people said weird things to me all the time around Harvard. People would say things all the time about wearing a kippah. I had a professor in the classroom who parenthetically had served in the Wehrmacht. That should have been a red flag. Who said really anti-Semitic things to me, but it didn't feel threatening to me. I just thought it was weird. And I argued with him about my grade, which he gave me a bad grade on because he said I was reading Paul wrong. Whatever, that's a whole other podcast. But it didn't scare me. And now something flips in terms of that sense of being scared. And I guess I want to take both angles of that warm bath of liberalism. Frank, I'll start with you and then I'll come back to you, Sarah. What do you think were the central features? What made it possible for you to feel that we were basically fine? And not just what did it feel like, but what were the characteristics of this society that Jews built in America or enabled America to build that enabled us to feel that sense of security?
So American Jews are incredible dreamcasters and Imagineers. It's really one of the geniuses of our community. We happen to be good at creating communal organizations and philanthropy and all these other things, but really one of our gifts was to imagine what American Jewish life would be like by casting these glossy images about what American life could look like. And, it goes back to Emma Lazarus. It goes back to people like, there was a Harvard philosopher named Horace Kallen, an idea about America as being a tolerant society where to participate, you didn't need to engage in this European bargain where you needed to renounce your particularism, your Jewish identity in order to become a citizen. In the United States, citizenship was about authentically showing up. And it was the hyphen in the middle of Jewish American was not something to eschew. It was something to embrace. And so that is one vision. And then the second vision is this vision of, the corollary to that is this idea that America is a place where there is no blood and soil nationalism, which is kind of a fiction, but it's a wonderful aspiration about what America could look like. So it's a celebration of immigration. It was this idea that in order for Jews to thrive, we needed there to be broad protections for all religious and ethnic and political minorities. It meant that we could participate in the culture as truly ourselves. We didn't need to change our names anymore. You didn't need to be George Burns or Edward Robinson in order to participate in American life. You could participate as Jerry Seinfeld. You could participate as Adam Sandler singing the Hanukkah song. And that felt that kind of cultural ubiquity, that acceptance from the mainstream, the way in which it was possible to see yourself reflected in the mainstream. It was bizarre in retrospect because we're only 2 or 3% of the population at best. But if you turned on the television set and you watched the nightly news or you watched prime time, it felt like we were looming over the culture. It was an incredible privilege for an ethnic minority to have that kind of salience and to feel seen and accepted and embraced in that sort of way.
Yeah. So, and I actually, my favorite example in that, maybe the turning point in the whole story, is Lenny Bruce doing comedy routines in comedy clubs describing Jewish and Goyish, and naming that there's something different between the Jewish and the Goyish in a way that says, yeah, Jews are a little weird, but not dangerously weird. Not like weird in a way it should be scary. It's just that they eat their rye bread and we're white bread. Like that distinction, and that marks that like you're not trying to hide your Jewishness in order to participate in something. You're going to participate fully as a Jew and be part of the kind of cultural thriving.
But are you?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, but are you? I just, it's like this idea that Adam Sandler, that this is like the full Jew. Like this is like, I don't know. I hear what you're saying, and I'm not in any way saying that wasn't wonderful. It was wonderful. I mean, the vacation from history that we had in America was wonderful. But I just, I'm just questioning a little bit, like these very public Jews, like were they really public as Jews, or as sort of like, haha, I'm a cultural Jew. Haha, my mother's anxious. Haha, I like bagels. Haha, I'm rye bread, not white bread. But we're both bread. I just go to a different church. Like, what was the kind of as a Jew that was presenting? And that's a fine way to be a Jew. I'm not criticizing that, but I just wonder, like, Joe Lieberman was so notable. It was like, oh my God, Joe Lieberman, like, whoa, this guy, he's an Orthodox Jew. That was the exception. That was not the rule. So I just want to, this is Meir Soloveichik's, I think this is sort of his argument, which was almost a counter argument to your piece, which was, yeah, it was a golden age for a certain type of Jew, for a certain type of kind of assimilated cultural Jew that was acceptable, right? That was kind of like, oh, I'm just like you, but with a fun ethnic church. Like, you don't go to your church, haha, I don't go to my Jew church either. We're both kind of modern and we're, spiritual but not religious. And so I don't know, I just want to push a little bit on like that, what was the nature of that acceptance?
I think that it sells American Jewry a little bit short not to note all of the incredible theology and theological innovation that emerged on American soil. So your critique of Jerry Seinfeld is probably fair, right? Like that's a pretty empty reason to celebrate American Jewish life. But in a constellation of kind of the whole edifice, you have Meir Soloveichik's father wrote an incredible book and founded an incredible strain of Judaism that was about the tension of living in American life and navigating American life. Even all of the Jeremiads decrying assimilation represent an incredible canon of Jewish thought, going back to the stuff that Abraham Joshua Heschel started writing as soon as he got to these shores. The American offshoot of Chabad is an incredible theological innovation. Conservative Judaism is an incredible offshoot. Reconstructionist strain of Judaism is an incredible offshoot. America is a place where religions tend to innovate because there is this blank canvas to work with, and that's been true for Jews as well. And so we're experiencing things in the same sort of way that Jews all over the world experiencing things in this interaction with modernity. There is assimilation. That tug is there, and we do lose some of the richness in the course of it. But then there are all these other things that spring up in that same space.
Yeah, I guess I feel, Sarah, that represents my growing up story, where I felt, as the child of an American public servant, perfectly assimilated into the possibilities of what it meant to become an American, ultimately representing America overseas as a Jew, but also with a richness of modern Orthodox upbringing and Jewish education that felt like it was only possible because of America. But that experience left you hollow.
No, and here, first of all, the ability of Jews to thrive in America is unparalleled. And there's no question that the conservative movement, which is now 18% of American Jews, has thrived. The Reconstructionist movement, which is now, I think, 1.4% of American Jews, has thrived. I mean, there are these pockets, and I'm in no way denying that. And that is the beauty of that vacation from history we had. That you guys were free. You were free to grow up with this deep, rich Jewish identity that didn't impede your Americanness. That was the beauty of that vacation. But the legacy of the history that led to that vacation, that led us to be safe enough in this country to be kind of accepted, is that I grew up, and the majority of American Jews grew up with something that wasn't that rich Jewish identity, and that is a cost. And I think, I sometimes see in the organized Jewish world this idea that kind of every Jew knows what the Talmud is. It's hard for a lot of people who didn't grow up like I did to realize just how little most American Jews know about the tradition. I think it's just hard to even imagine, and they don't believe me. And so there are certainly wonderful, I think, minority pockets of Jews doing deep, rich Jewishness. And then there's like a vast number of Jews out there who don't have access, who don't even know that exists. Like, I'd never heard of the Federation 10 years ago. Never heard of it. I didn't know. I wasn't connected. And, looking at the Pew survey data, I wasn't alone. There's a lot of Jews like me.
I guess one of the things that I'm steering towards is that there's this old chestnut of like America was good for Jews but bad for Judaism, which is to say the assimilation that was made possible for American Jews in America was very good for Jews as individuals. All of the attainments that we were able to achieve in every piece of industry, socioeconomic, political mobility, the fluidity of boundaries, the breakdown of the kind of structural anti-Semitism that exists in other places that Jews lived. But there's an open question that we could continue to debate about whether it was ultimately good for Judaism itself, for the flourishing of Judaism. And the flip side of that is, okay, well, there are only two ways to kind of continue to preserve Jewish particularistic thriving. One is to bring back just enough anti-Semitism that it's not dangerous, but where Jews are reminded of what it means to be Jewish. That's choice one. I would say that is what we might call a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Right? Just enough anti-Semitism. The second option is to bring back just enough Jewish weirdness. Like, are Jews willing to be countercultural and weird in readopting Jewish religious and cultural habits and practices that are not the Protestant versions of Jewishness? Because it's only by doing that that we will be able to kind of really create Jewish continuity. I guess I'll start with you, Frank. Where are you on that?
I'll take door number 2, Bob. No, I think that, first of all, anti-Semitism has emerged.
Yeah.
And
good news, bad news, right?
Right. No, it has emerged.
Yeah.
And I think we can't deny that it is a looming presence in American life, that it is something that hit us across the face in a way that I think will have profound implications for our community. Those implications will be both good and bad. I think that there's incredible sense of identification that didn't exist before October 7th, that is real and that could be harnessed in incredibly productive sorts of ways. I think that I don't dismiss that one of the sublime things about being a Jew is that you exist within the context of this extremely contingent sense of existence where your peoplehood is a very fragile thing. And the fact that it manages to persist despite history is actually something that is sublime and overpowering. And to be reminded of that contingency, I don't think is necessarily a bad source of identification. And it's ultimately going to be connected to the second thing that you're describing, is that sense of contingency, I think actually does steer people and make people feel countercultural, right? That I think that actually opens up spaces for the type of countercultural weirdness, your term, not mine, is something that I think could actually take root in this sort of environment.
I mean, I definitely option 2, obviously, but I think, being honest, I think the only way to get to option 2 is for some of option 1. I think we have to kind of be forced into it. And I'll tell you, I'm seeing this a lot on college campuses. Having spoken at like 25 campus Hillels since October 7th, what I am seeing is Jewish students being Jews. Like they're the only students on campus who really have to think. No one cares about their feelings, so they can't just throw a tantrum. They actually have to muster up some facts. Their stories are always decentered. They're told, like, you're an oppressor, we're going to decenter you. So they spend a lot of time listening to other people's stories, and they're really, they're learning the Jewish lesson that the majority, and particularly the mob, is often wrong. It's an important lesson. Ahad Ha'am, famous Zionist, the whole idea of like the blood libel taught Jews that sometimes the majority is wrong, that everyone can be wrong and the Jews can be right. And seeing this on campus when these kids are getting kicked out of every progressive campus club because they have a no Zionist allowed policy, What I tell them is I'm like, start your own climate change club and make it open to everyone of every background, every belief. You make it radically welcoming, radically inclusive, and then build the best climate club you can. And this is what we've done in this country, right? This is what we did with law firms and hospitals back in my parents' day. And I do wonder if that little bit of option one that is happening now, it is leading to this weirdness. And what I want Jews to know the awesome weirdness that we have. Like, most Jews do not know that there is Jewish wisdom about any of the issues that we're thinking about today. They have no idea. Because again, if your Judaism is 3 bad holidays and 1 good one, how would you know?
Yeah.
Right? How would you know?
Yeah, it's the problem that we have, though, is that the off-ramps are so powerful. And the off-ramps are either, I'm being pushed out, I'm therefore going to adapt my politics to accommodate themselves to the mob. That's one choice. And the other is not, I'm going to try to retain my commitment to my liberal values that have carried me until now, but I'm going to reject those liberal values entirely. I mean, that's where I want us to land, is in a recommitment to the very principles of a liberal Judaism that was rooted in the value of human dignity and autonomy and freedom that we built a whole Judaism around in this country. And by the same token, that we want to advocate for in Israel, a liberal Zionist position that has no plausibility structure currently in Israeli politics, but still might be the best version of a current Zionism out there. How do we go about cultivating that sensibility when the off-ramps are so powerful?
Well, I think we also need to consider the context that we are stepping into a post-liberal America, that it was easy for Jews to celebrate liberalism when liberalism was the political norm. And maybe the weirdness now and the countercultural thing is actually to promote liberal values. And that I think about where we're going in this spiral that we're in. And one of the dangers in this spiral is that Jews look for protection from the strongman, from the person who stands up and says, I am your protector, I will fend off these people. And it's such an attractive option to feel like you have that on your side. But I think the danger is that in the history of the world, that type of liberalism is actually the only thing that has demonstrably allowed for Jewish thriving. And the golden age was the golden age because there was this political context. And so if Jews a generation ago were able to look at America and say, this is what it means to be an exceptional nation, we were able to identify certain values and to read America back to itself in a very profound sort of way that actually changed America's own sense of self-conception. I feel like it's kind of incumbent upon Jews to re-engage in that project at this moment where liberalism feels like it's slipping away on both sides. I think it's incumbent to say, this is America's best self, and it grows from something that we know from our own history and from our own canonical text, that this is a way forward.
What worries me about, as I see rising illiberalism in our politics, I see the appeal for a lot of people of an illiberal kind of Judaism, the very angry, everyone's out to get us, we are just going to take what we can get, and who cares about everyone else, it's just about us. So I see that, and that option, I get the appeal of it. It's strong, it has a very strong, clear message, and if on the other side, the option is kind of a watery, social justice is good, with no particular substance, I worry that, that illiberal Jewish message is quite powerful. So I think my answer is we need a liberal Judaism that actually has substance, that has radical, countercultural, powerful wisdom for how we live today that will make people think actually there's something worth engaging in here.
Yeah, which also, by the way, requires a continued focus also on what it means to be a critic of our own people at the same time. The external threats are easy to notice, and it requires also us to push back against the internal issues as well. You're going to say, Frank?
I feel like we're almost 75% of the way there. When you listen to the way that Jews tend to position themselves in American political discourse, there are a couple things that we fall back on as expressions of our core beliefs. We want to believe in free speech, because I think we know from the 20th century, going back to the post-Cold War era, is that the protection of minority rights and dissident rights is something that is actually it's good for us as well as it's good for the nation. I think certain ideas about meritocracy we want to believe in as expressions of a type of liberalism. The challenge, I think, is not to engage in that type of liberalism selectively, because it's so hard to be. I find this in myself. You land on places where you sound so fervent about your values, and then there are instances of hypocrisy that creep up on you. And I'm afraid that the rest of the world can see those moments of hypocrisy, and it's not attractive.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the best way for liberal Judaism and liberal Zionism to win is for it to be as passionate about its commitments as the illiberal causes that are rising on both ends. Let me ask you the final question, which is a very American question, which is, we started with diagnoses of things that aren't working, both the longer arc history of Jews in America, the more recent episodes. Both of you have focused a lot of your attention on campus as a site of some of your concerns. But give me one thing that makes you optimistic about the possibility that we as American Jews are going to be able to get past this point. It can be a vision, an image, a story, something that makes you feel optimistic.
Well, I will just pause for a moment on campus, where I went to Columbia. I've written a lot about Columbia. And I do feel like as I've gone to campus and I've met with Columbia students and students who have been on the front lines of things that I would describe as objectively anti-Semitic, I have seen that they become more accustomed to engaging in the type of open, courageous argumentation that I think a lot of us would benefit from. That it feels like one of the tendencies that we'll have in a moment where we feel under threat is to hunker down. Which again can be a very productive tendency in a lot of ways, but this retreat from the world, to retreat from the political arena, and to see kids get trained in the actual work of politics, which is sitting in a room with people who may not like you, and you may not like them, and actually having a passionate argument with them where you don't walk away.
I have this fantasy where we could go back to Europe in the early 1800s, and with our modern with the sensibility of Jewish pride and joy and curiosity, we could actually kind of reinvent Judaism from there. We could kind of bring Judaism into modernity without the Protestant cookie cutter, without the real profound hatred of most of our fellow citizens. And I kind of wonder what kind of Judaism would arise. And I feel optimistic because I see a lot of people today doing that project. I see them at Hartman, at Hadar, at Sfara, really mining the depths of our tradition to take our wisdom and bring it to the Jewish public. And I think that makes me very, very optimistic.
We can do that project without a time machine. So
Exactly.
I want to thank you to Frank Foer, to Sarah Hurwitz. Thank you for being here tonight. And please enjoy the amazing sounds here in Nashville of Distant Cousins. Thanks, everybody.
I awake from a typical nightmare with the sunlight in my eyes. Maybe I've been sleeping all my life. 1,000 words can't begin to paint all the pictures we have seen. They say everything looks good in black and white. It's in my blood, it's in my mind, speaking through me all the time. It's in my blood now, it's in my bones, shaking me. Where were you when I was 17? It's in my blood now. I was born in a mystical moment when the water's still like walls. Well, maybe I'm still running from it all. All these photographs of family only tell you one side of the
Thanks for listening to our show, and special thanks to our guests Frank Foer and Sarah Hurwitz. This live identity crisis event was sponsored by Schusterman Family Philanthropies, Crown Family Philanthropies, and the Jim Joseph Foundation. Thank you for making this event possible, and thank you to everyone who attended. Identity Crisis is produced by me, Tessa Zitter, and our executive producer is Maytal Friedman. This episode was produced with assistance from Annie Beyer-Chaffetz and Gabrielle Feinstone, and edited by Gareth Hobbs at Silver Sound NYC with theme music provided by So Called. Thank you to Distant Cousins for providing their song In My Blood for this episode. You can find their most recent album, Out of the Darkness, and more of their music on YouTube and Spotify. Transcripts of our show are now available on our website, typically a week after an episode airs. We're always looking for ideas for what we should cover in future episodes, so if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you have comments about this episode, please write to us at identitycrisis@shalomhartman.org. For more ideas from the Shalom Hartman Institute about what's unfolding right now, sign up for our newsletter in the show notes and subscribe to this podcast everywhere podcasts are available. See you next time, and thanks for listening.
It's in my blood, it's in my mind, speaking through me all the time. It's in my blood now, it's in my bones, shaking me, take me back.